Hi, Dr. P here, and the question for today is, what tends to slow down or speed up the play of games? And of course, this is not a definitive answer. I don't pretend I've thought of everything, but there is a lot here. This is related to Don't Make Me Think. What happens in games, mostly tabletop games, but some can happen in video games, that slows down the game unnecessarily. As with my video, Don't Make Me Think, there are ways for a designer to minimize these unnecessary tasks or distractions. Thinking, of course, is one of the major ways to slow down a game. The more decisions the player has to make, the longer it's likely to take. In the extreme, this can lead to analysis paralysis, when the player just can't decide what to do and so doesn't do anything at all. On the other hand, the purpose of many games is to make people have to decide amongst more choices than they can possibly do, so we may want to make the player think. Another category of slowdown is fiddliness. If the players frequently have to go through bits and cards to find a table or figure out things, or if they have to look through special rules, or if there's anything where they have to fiddle around, which is where the name comes from, it slows the game down. Record keeping in tabletop games is another thing. Of course, in video games, usually the record keeping is done by the computer. If players have to keep track of anything, it takes time. Obviously, if there are a lot of rules, and again we're talking more tabletop than video, it tends to slow the game down. Lack of familiarity with the mechanics of the game tends to slow down the game. Lack of familiarity with the strategy of the game can slow down the game, but that's why the first time people play my game Britannia, for example, it may take as much as 7 hours, but people who are experienced take 4 to 5 hours and sometimes less. One of the things you can do about this is put the rules on cards when you can, and then the players don't have to deal with the rule until the card is in hand. And so they're doing just one little thing at a time rather than trying to cope with all the rules. Another thing that slows games down is rolling lots of dice or re-rolling dice. For example, if you use a combat method in a tabletop war game that resolves the entire combat with one dice roll, as in the old Avalon Hill games, or with no dice rolls, as in some games including chess, that will be quicker than a method that can require recurring dice rolls because the conflict was not resolved in the first roll. If there's a lot of dice rolling, or a lot of conflicts I should say, then this can end up adding quite a bit of time to the game. Games that include negotiation, especially if it's secret negotiation away from the table, are going to take longer. Games with more players are going to take longer usually. Games where player elimination is the goal tend to go longer than games that have a time limit and don't try to eliminate players. Games with game-like moves, as opposed to, say, social deduction and party games, will take longer. Now, what tends to speed the game up? Well, it's an opposite to some of the things I've been talking about. Simple rules can speed the game up. Having few pieces or avatars or few cards in hand. If you have a hand of 4 cards instead of a hand of 7 cards, you're going to figure out more quickly what you're going to do in most cases. Not all, but most. Uniformity and absence of exceptions to the rules are going to speed it up. Easy decisions. Think about party games. They tend to move along very quickly. Simplicity in general is going to tend to speed the game up. A player who can think about what he or she is going to do while other people are playing is more likely to do something quickly. So, for example, if the player draws a card at the start of their turn rather than at the end, it slows the game down because they then have to think about what to do with that additional card. But many people won't think about what to do until it's their turn, and there's nothing a designer can do about that. That's just a common attitude. Some people might say that a fluid game where things change a lot in a short time or from one player's turn to his next turn or her next turn would slow the game down because players have to think more about what they're going to do. But I'm not sure this is so, because in a fluid game, the planners will not carefully plan out what they're going to do and change that plan as they see other players, what other players do, because it's too fluid. People who like fluidity tend to work by intuition or heuristics rather than logic, so they don't take very long to take a turn. And it's hard to say. Games that are more like puzzles may encourage players to take time to think about what they're doing because of the possibility of a perfect move. Opposed games that are clearly player versus player, for example poker, tend to move more quickly. There isn't a perfect move. It all depends on circumstances and chance. So if there isn't a perfect move, you don't try to spend a lot of time figuring out what the perfect move is. And this is a lot to absorb. There's a lot of interaction within the structure of a game unless it's very simple. And every change you make to the game has its consequences in other parts of the game. Thanks for listening.